All right, today I'm going to be going through and rebuilding a carburetor on a Yamaha Big Bear 250. This is a 2007 model. Obviously we have the carburetor off of the four-wheeler already at this time. We had to remove this cover here, and your throttle cable will run from your thumb throttle down through this tab here and down into this cover here, underneath this cover. So we've got 3 Phillips screws we're going to pull off. Underneath of this cover is a red O-ring, a red gasket that's going to seal this cover. Any kind of water and debris can't get in there. It is broken on this one, so we've got to replace that at the same time we rebuild it. So here is where your throttle cable hooks up. It goes into an area that a little brass fitting that fits into this this hole here, and it looks like this. And this brass fitting will hook into your throttle cable, slide into that hole, and then when you pull your throttle or push your throttle, your thumb throttle there, it'll turn this butterfly. What that is doing is opening up that butterfly on this side, allowing more air to be pulled through there, sucking more fuel up. When you adjust your idle, you've got your turn screw over here. When you adjust it, turning it clockwise is going to turn your idle up. Turning it counterclockwise is going to turn it down. Essentially what you're doing is opening this butterfly slightly. You want to make sure your four-wheeler is warmed up before you adjust your idle. You want to make sure that that you just do small increments. Otherwise your idle is going to be really high once you take off and start riding. I go ahead and I'll tap that throttle a couple times while I'm adjusting the idle. That way if the this slide over here is catching it all, it is coming back down and then going to where it needs to be. So that is your idle adjust on this one. And I'm going to go ahead and leave that cover off. We're going to flip this carburetor on its end here. You've got 4 Phillips screws to remove the bottom bowl. Right here is a Phillips screw that will drain your carburetor if you want it to, and you turn that out a couple turns and your fuel will start to flow out this bottom nipple here. You can see it there, and you should have a hose on there running beneath your motor there on the four-wheeler. Otherwise that fuel is just going to dump directly on top of that motor. Same thing if that fuel is bouncing around, or the four-wheeler is bouncing around on a trailer, or you've got your needle and seat that's leaking, it'll start leaking out this tab here, and will discolor your motor and could potentially start a fire if your four-wheeler is hot while it's doing it. So pull these 4 screws off here to open this bottom bowl up. And this typically is where you have your most problems if your four-wheeler is hard starting or it's not running right at higher RPM. More than likely it is going to be with your carburetor here, and your jets will get gummed up. So we're going to pull this bowl here. You can see there's another O-ring here. You want to make sure that that's in good condition, no rips or tears. If you've got a rebuild kit, majority of the time it'll come with a new O-ring here, and I just like to replace it if I'm going to rebuild it. So next we've got your jets underneath here. You've got your pilot jet here, your main jet here, and your secondary main here. This is your float, and underneath your float is a needle. Underneath your needle is the carburetor seat. So to remove your pilot jet, grab a screwdriver. I like to use a little bit bigger flat screwdriver as opposed to a smaller one, so that if you're turning these out and they're a little tight, a smaller screwdriver will end up just turning inside of this, damaging these orifices on these jets. So pilot jet is typically the one that is plugged if your four-wheeler is hard starting or it's just not running right at idle, and you've checked everything else. More than likely your pilot jet is the issue. You want to make sure that you can see through this. It's a very, very small port, but you will be able to see through it if you hold it up to the light. You want to blow through it with Carb&Choke cleaner. I prefer this Gum Out brand. It works the best. And then compressed air. Next thing you want to do, if you've got a set of these will be what you use to clean out your jets. And a lot of them have a ribbed wire on there that helps clean out any kind of gum and debris. Sometimes these are too small or too big to fit through the small orifices on these jets. So I like to use a little small strand of wire. You just want to run it through there, spin it back and forth, clean it off, do the same thing again. Make sure that, again, that you can push this all the way through, make sure you can see through it, make sure you can blow through it with Carb&Choke cleaner and compressed air. Next, we'll go to our secondary main, which is this one here. It's the smaller of the two. jets, it is slightly smaller than your main jet. The port is, the orifice is larger than your pilot jet. So secondary main, same thing. You want to make sure that you can see through it, make sure that you blow through it with compressed air. And your main jet, same thing as well. A lot of times, or sometimes, your main jet will come out with your main jet holder, which is what's going on here. That'll spin everything out. Your main jet is not attached to your main jet holder, which is here. And most of the time you can pull that out without your main jet holder coming out with it. Either way, you want to make sure you can see through it, blow through it. Use Carb&Choke cleaner to blow through it again. Make sure holding it up to light that you can see through it. Again, this is going to be the biggest orifice of them all. You want to make sure that your O-ring here is good. And if it's chipping off, a lot of times what happens is that when that O-ring is starting to fall to pieces, a lot of times those pieces will run up into these jets and get stuck in these jets, causing issues. So to pull your float off then and your needle and seat, grab a Phillips screwdriver again, turn that screw out. That holds that pin in there. You can take and slide this up. You don't have to remove that screw completely, but you want to pull it up enough to get this pin out of here, and then this pin will slide in and out. And there is your needle there. You can pull that needle off. You can replace it. I suggest doing that when you rebuild your carburetor. Replace this. It's got a rubber tip on there, and sometimes these groove. Sometimes those rubber tips break off. Sometimes these seats here get squared because of how this needle sits. Also, another thing, this needle is adjustable, so you've got a metal tab here that you can adjust if your fuel is constantly dripping out. If your needle is good and it's set to the proper settings, you can push that down slightly to slow that fuel down, or to shut that fuel off sooner. So that's your needle there. Your seat then, just remove that small Phillips screwdriver and this seat will pop out of there. It's got an O-ring on there to seal it up. Make sure that you replace that when you rebuild your carburetor. So turning it on its side here, we've got your choke plunger that sits in here with a plastic cap, and your plunger sits down in there, and your cable that runs up to your handlebars will also slide down in there. Your fuel coming in from your fuel tank will go into this nipple here, and then it ends up, it'll flow through here and come out your needle and seat area there. So just a little bit about that carburetor. So next thing we've got is your top, your slide area here with your diaphragm. A lot of times to test these, I'll take compressed air, blow through it, and that'll raise that slide and that needle up. If it doesn't raise up and down and it doesn't slide back down properly, then you've got issues with your diaphragm in here or your spring. So I like to put my finger over top of this. There is a spring underneath here. It's not a tightly wound spring, so pieces aren't going to go flying everywhere, but I just like to keep my hand on here so it doesn't push these screws and stuff off. Just makes it a little bit easier. So 2 screws to pull that there, then pull that cap, and that spring will sit in that groove there. There's your spring there. You can take my other finger there, slide up. Now you want to make sure that that diaphragm isn't stuck around the outside there. If it is and you're pushing up, you're going to rip that diaphragm. The diaphragms aren't cheap. So one direction that this slide will go in, you can see that there. You want to make sure again that there's no rips or tears on this diaphragm here. This needle is not adjustable on this model, but you can replace it. So grab a small pair of pliers there. You just pull this plastic cap out. There's a spring on there as well as a O-ring. You want to make sure that those are in good condition. Make sure you keep track of where that spring goes. And then we've got your needle here, and I'll pull this out and show you a couple things here. The order of parts here. So we've got a metal washer here, and then we've got your clip for your needle next, and then we've got a plastic washer next, and then down in the slide still is another washer. So dump that out there. It's a very, very small washer, but you want to make sure it goes back in that order, as that is how you position that needle, and you can get different size washers there if you need to raise that up, but like I said, that needle is not adjustable. Sometimes this clip on the needle itself is adjustable. This model is not. Going back together, you just want to make sure that that washer doesn't drop off when you drop that needle in there. you want to make sure that it goes in that order. So again, washer, plastic washer, C-clip, top washer there, in that order. Drop that down in there, make sure it goes all the way down, make sure your washers stay in place, and then take your plastic cap here with the spring and the O-ring, drop that down inside there, make sure that that spring stays on there, and that is replaceable as well. Now a little test you can do, you can take, and when you push on this, I'm going to do it so you can see it there. When you push on that, spring loaded, pops back down, but also stops. Now if you take and push really hard on it, you're going to push that plastic cap off of there, but it should stop. If it doesn't, you want to make sure that you've got everything secured in there properly, as your four-wheeler's not going to run right. Now going back together, again, it's directional, so slide it down in there. If it's not just dropping down in there, you want to take and look down in this carburetor, as that needle there needs to slide right into your main jet holder area there. And sometimes you got to use your fingers or a small pair of pliers to position that needle where it needs to go to slide down in there. Before we slide it all the way down, what I like to do is take my finger, put it, hold that slide up. I like to take that diaphragm, roll it down like that there, and I keep my finger underneath there, underneath the slide here, and then I kind of press this into place. You don't want to push it up too far, but also if it slides all the way down in there, then that is going to be sucking. I'll show you what it does there. It sucks your diaphragm out of the seat here. So I like to take, again, push it up, slide your diaphragm down, put it in the groove there. And if that diaphragm has gotten fuel on it or Carb&Choke cleaner, you'll have to dry it out, set it in the windowsill. That sun will dry it out to where it needs to be and it'll sit properly. Again, this port here needs to go in line with this one here. Slide that spring over top of that tab there, slide that on. Still have my finger underneath there holding the slide up. You can see that there, and I like to do that until I get the screws in. That keeps that diaphragm from going down and pulling itself out of place. So all of this carburetor you can blow through with Carb&Choke cleaner. Make sure that the orifices are all cleaned out. You've got different orifices here and up here, and then as well on this side here, you've got a little jet here that needs cleaned out. I like to remove that, blow through it with Carb&Choke cleaner. Then different ports here. You don't need to spray through this with Carb&Choke cleaner, especially when your diaphragm is on, or could potentially rip that diaphragm having that Carb&Choke cleaner in there. So setting it back up here, I'm going to go ahead and put this bottom side back together here. Take your float and then find your needle here. Doesn't matter which direction this needle goes. Slide it. Either way is fine. Sliding it on there. You can slide it and then drop it right down into your seat there. Drop it down in there, and then we can take and push our needle underneath that screw. You can remove that screw completely if you would like. Snug that up. You want to make sure this is an aluminum carburetor, so you don't need to tighten. You don't need to really torque down a lot of these screws, or you're just going to end up stripping them out. So main jet, again, that included the main jet holder there. Make sure that that's cleaned off really good. Secondary main jet sits alongside it. And then your pilot jet kind of sits in between them there. Take a screwdriver then, snug them up. Again, these are brass going into aluminum carburetor, so you don't have to torque them down a bunch. You want to make sure they're snug though, because they are going to be upside down. Your four-wheeler's going to be rattling. So they can work themselves out if they're not snug. So don't forget to snug them up. I've had that before. You get your carburetor done, feel like you're all set, and then your four-wheeler starts running rough. So make sure that those are snugged up. Double check that O-ring, make sure it's seated properly. If you've got a new one, I take and put a little dab of oil or a little dab of grease on here in about 2 places, kind of holds that O-ring, because when you flip it upside down like this to put that this bowl on, a lot of times you can dump that O-ring out. 4 screws going back on here, and then your longest screw with the washer is going to be for your idle adjust right here. I'm going to go ahead and snug these up. And this is cleaning the carburetor and rebuilding the carburetor on a Yamaha. Again, this is a 2007 model Big Bear 250. If you've got questions or comments, please leave those below. If there's something else you'd like me to do on this four-wheeler or another four-wheeler, make sure you leave those in the comments below and I'll try to get to that. And if this video has been helpful, please like and subscribe. And again, remember that O-ring there. Thanks for watching.